Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for all your patience in working with us through our technical issues. We're really excited to have you here for this conversation about connecting Haiti's past to its present and the diaspora to Haitians in Haiti right now. With everything going on with Black Lives Matter and Black uprisings around the world, we thought it was timely to have a discussion connecting Haiti to what's going on and really discussing how Haiti can help us frame Black liberation and the struggle for Black lives regarding what Haiti has gone through in the past and also current movements for human rights in Haiti as well. And I just want to first introduce myself. My name is France Francois. I'm the founder of Encultured Company, and Encultured Company sows the seeds of peace, conflict resolution, reconciliation, collaboration, healing, and dialogue amongst young Black and Latinx people. We focus mostly on Haitians and Dominicans to build bridges where others have built barriers. Kassan, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Hi, I'm Cassandra Thiano. I'm a human rights lawyer. I'm a member of Encultured Company, and I also teach at Columbia Law School, where I also direct their program on human rights and public international law.
Wanda.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Wanda Tima, and I am the founder and co-founder. I'm the founder of Lignon Suite and the co-founder of the Haitian American. We are a digital media marketing platform that highlights the best of Haiti and the Haitian community daily.
And of course, our esteemed panelist, Emmanuela.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Emmanuela. I'm an economist and activist from Haiti. It's my pleasure to be with you today, and I hope we'll have a good dialogue and we'll explore so many questions that are relevant to what we're living in Haiti and what we can learn from history.
Marlene.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marlene Daut. I am a professor at the University of Virginia in the United States, and I work on the Haitian Revolution and 19th century Haitian history more broadly. And I'm delighted to be here and so thankful to have received the invitation from Encultured Company and Lignon Suite.
Thanks, everyone. So we're going to just jump right into the tough questions. As you guys may have noticed, a lot of discussion around Haiti always focuses on 1804 and just stops there, as if Haiti has stopped in time and nothing has happened since the Haitian Revolution. There is a lack of analysis around Haitian history in media and pop culture. And Marlene, would you just give us some context for what happened in Haiti after the Haitian Revolution, just to set the foundation for the conversation we're about to have today?
Sure. So yeah, it's always been kind of fascinating at the level of sort of studying the discourse to see how enamored people are with 1804, as you said, the moment of emergence into nationhood, which is of course extremely important, but really important things happen in the 19th century that set the stage for a deeper understanding of how Haitian history is going to unfold, particularly in the 20th century into the present moment. The first of those things is that in 1806, we have the assassination of Dessalines, and this creates a fracturing of Haiti into two separate states, with Pétion ruling in the south and Henri Christophe ruling in the north eventually as king. Pétion's death in 1818, Christophe's suicide in 1820 are again other formative moments because they occasion huge changes. In the case of Pétion, we get Jean-Pierre Boyer, also a veteran of the Haitian Revolution, as president. And with the death of Christophe, we get the reunification of the north and the south of Haiti. And then by 1822, we have the reunification of the entire island under one government. And then by 1825, we have this sort of very disastrous moment that has ricocheting effects, which is the indemnity that President Boyer signs, whereby the Haitian government agrees to pay 150 million francs to the French government as the price of recognition.
So Marlene, thanks for giving us this context. Can you tell us a little bit more what the basis of this indemnity was? What did Haiti owe France?
So the Haitian government under Christophe had been adamant that they owed France nothing. Christophe sent his told his ministers to send letters that said there will be no negotiation without a de facto recognition of Haitian independence. And they were willing to maybe think about some kind of trade agreements that might be favorable to France, but they were not willing to pay any indemnity at all. Pétion, on the other hand, kind of opened the door for the indemnity in 1814 by suggesting that maybe the price of the Louisiana Purchase, that maybe something could be worked out. And these sorts of negotiations continue all the way into the 1820s. And up until 1825, the French government, both French kings, Louis XVIII and Charles X, had been adamant that, you know, they were not going to release Saint-Domingue. They persisted in calling the island Saint-Domingue, and they wanted at least suzerainty or some kind of protectorate status over the island, and then decided that this exorbitant amount was the amount that would be needed to compensate the former enslavers for their lost quote-unquote property, including the people they claimed as their slaves. And so that was the basis of it. But France also wanted to have most favored nation status. So the 150 million francs, that was the initial amount of the agreement, does not actually capture the entire landscape of debt that Haiti ends up owing, because they are forced to give this favorable tariffs to France also.
That's crazy. I think it's really important to kind of pause in this moment, right, in terms of what the indemnity actually meant. Can you talk about how it reshaped the Haitian economy, society, and government to have such a heavy debt placed on it at inception of nationhood? I think one of the interesting quotes in your article was that even at the time, you had European countries saying, like, this is crazy, this not even we could ever pay this amount, and the amount was almost 5 times even the French economy at that time. So what would that have meant for a country at the inception of nationhood?
It meant so much, because there is the amount itself and then the loans. That the agreement also said that Haiti would only be able to take out loans to pay the debt from French banks. And so that's what happens for the first 2 installments. And then even when the amount is renegotiated in 1838 to be 90 million total, with Haiti still owing 60 million, again, you have this clause that you can only loan the money from French banks. So you can't even get kind of the most favorable interest rates. So again, compounding the debt. And what this does is that Jean-Pierre Boyer tells the Haitian people that the debt is the debt of the entire country, that this is not his debt or the government's debt, that it's the debt of the people, and that they all have to work to pay it off. And so he levies these taxes. And so this money, tax money, right, that could have gone into investing in schools, the way that Henri Christophe was trying to create a kind of national school system. Hospitals, again, Henri Christophe had been erecting hospitals and school of medicine, public infrastructure such as roads. Eventually, when we get railroads into Haiti, right, that doesn't come until the US occupation, precisely because so much money is being invested at this moment into paying off the debt. But there's also the opportunity cost and the extraordinary possibilities of things that Haitians could have created and done that would have been vastly different from other countries that we will never know. And I constantly think, when I sort of entertain this question of what was lost, in Discourse on Colonialism, Aimé Césaire says, you know, I'm talking about societies drained of their essence, cultures trampled underfoot, institutions undermined, lands confiscated, religions smashed, magnificent artistic creations destroyed, extraordinary possibilities wiped out. I am talking about natural economies that have been disrupted. And that is simply to say, we don't know what would have been built had this money not been drained from Haiti at that early moment.
Sorry, just a section. Could you put that amount in like modern day US dollars so people listening can understand like How much was that by the time Haiti finished paying it off? And when did Haiti finish paying it off?
So Haiti paid it's complicated because Haiti paid the 90 million amount in the 1880s. But then there were all kinds of fees. Those fees were paid the interest, I should say, was paid in 1910, but the fees that were attached to all the loans were not paid until 1947. In today's money, the estimate is anywhere from 20 to 40 billion US dollars. 20 to 40 billion US dollars. That is not taking into account the most favored nation status, but also, as I mentioned, the opportunity cost, because if you are paying this amount, you're not investing not only in just things that benefit the society immediately, but they live in a trade economy. So there's all kinds of things that you can't do. You can't create more wealth and more money. And so when people talk about a wealth gap, it really is a global racial wealth gap that is the legacy of slavery and colonialism. And we see it persisting and repeating over and over again, especially in the former French colonies, when France consistently creates these policies whereby even their colonies, once released from being under the tutelage of the French government, need to pay them, which is exactly what France did in West Africa as well with the colonial Franc system.
I think any of us with student loans can really empathize with the lost opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm struck by the words of Aimé Césaire because he himself came from a French protectorate, right? One of those countries that will forever be under, I don't know, I guess, under the control of the French government. And, you know, you mentioned that Pétion started the conversations. He kind of opened the door to the debt. And then Boyer kind of sealed the fatal deal. I guess my question is, did he have a choice? You know, when we think about the geopolitics of the time, did Boyer have the opportunity to make a different choice? And related to that, I guess my next, the follow-up to that is to dream a little bit about what Haiti might have been without that crushing debt.
Yeah, it's difficult to say whether or not he had a choice in the way that we typically think of choices. So one of the things I mentioned in the article is the fleet, the French warships that accompany Baron de Macau as he is bringing the indemnity agreement. But some historians think that the French government was just posturing, that they really wouldn't have fired on Haiti, and that Boyer himself had also kind of, you know, put out this display of arms when they saw the French fleet sort of coming. But the question of what happens if the indemnity agreement is never struck is a different one, because undoubtedly we would have a different Haiti today. It's just simply not possible that things would have turned out exactly the same way. Would it be a better Haiti? It's hard to imagine that it wouldn't be, because the poverty that resulted was crushing, and it also destabilized the government because, and this is not to excuse Boyer's actions, because we always have a sort of choice in quotation marks, but those choices are circumscribed by the world in which we live. So sometimes when I'm looking at early Haitian leaders and I find myself saying, you know, why couldn't their dreams have been better? I force myself to remember that many of them were formerly enslaved people, Dessalines and Christophe, right? They are dreaming of a world in which they're not enslaved anymore. And the world that they came from was a world that told them there were no possibilities. And the fact that they did any of the things they did is extraordinary on its own. And then when you get to Pétion and Boyer, you could say, well, you know, they wanted to sell the country. But when you look at the face of it, you know, Pétion wants to preserve Haitian independence, and so does Boyer. I mean, they never give in to the deals that they could have struck, which would have made Haiti a protectorate of France. They don't do that. So they do want independence. And for some reason, this seems the best avenue to them. And again, their choices were limited, but we can look back now and say that it was disastrous. But of course, they don't know that that's going to happen. What does a better Haiti entail? We simply cannot say. Again, to think about the Césaire kind of quote, it's almost as if the sky is the limit, right? Because anything could have happened afterward. In fact, an indemnity could have been struck later. I mean, we simply don't know, but what we do know is what did happen, and that, and we do know that there is a way forward, which is that there can be restitution made. The past is the past, sure, but the future is the future, and those possibilities are still out there, and we can change them if we try.
Thank you for that. I think one of the things that we often do when we're imagining, you know, Afrofuturism, for example, like we often pit leaders against each other. So there's a world, we often imagine a world of Malcolm versus Martin, of Du Bois versus someone else, and things like that. And so we're living in this, you know, post-Boyer Haiti, basically. But you had a really interesting essay about Henri Christophe's vision for Haiti and how that vision was extinguished. So can you contrast maybe a Boyer versus Christophe Haiti and what that vision could have meant for Haitian leadership, not only then, but presently as well?
So Christophe had this vision of a free and prosperous and self-sufficient Haiti, one that could thrive off both subsistence crops like wheat and other grains, and have a robust and healthy export crop kind of economy, the staples that were the staples during the colonial era of coffee, indigo, and sugar. So this is his vision. He tells the Haitian people, use parts of your plots of land to grow wheat, to grow other things that we need, because, you know, one of the very interesting things that he said towards the end of his life was that, you know, as long as we're dependent on foreign nations, we're not ever really going to be free. And this brings me back to what Cassandre said about Martinique, and Martinique being a French colony. And Glissant in Caribbean Discourse talks about how France created dependencies out of these former colonies. So whereas the state was built off of the wealth that was produced in these colonies, so France was dependent on the slave system. When the slave system ended and they created departments out of these former colonies, they made those departments, those islands, dependent on them, so that everything was sort of imported into Martinique and Guadeloupe and Réunion. And so where they have been societies that produced many, many things, now they're societies that can only kind of capture and get things from the metropole. And so it's almost like Christophe had a kind of prescient vision that if you depend on getting those staples, wheat, for example, which was the big one, which is why I keep mentioning it, because there was a question in the era of whether or not wheat could be grown in the tropics because of the climate. And so he knew that as long as he needed those things, that he would constantly have to renegotiate the terms of Haiti's existence with the colonial world powers, and that you had to be careful what you said. You had to be careful what kinds of demands you made. And we see this when we read Thomas Clarkson and Christophe's letters. Clarkson is constantly advising Christophe to keep his ministers like Baron de Vatte in check. Tell him not to talk about France. Tell him not to say this. Tell him not to say that. And we see that some of the writers, Vatte in particular, cannot be kind of controlled in this way. And so that's what I would say is that, yes, Christophe had this kind of vision and he wasn't able to carry it out either. But again, as you said, the pitting of one leader against another, when we see that the world they all live in is a world of so many difficult choices, and it's impossible to say how any of us would have behaved in those circumstances.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that, actually? Do you think there's been a Haitian leader since then, maybe even in modern times, that was able to carry out some of the visions of a Christophe Haiti?
I think that, without getting myself into too much trouble here, but I think that many Haitian rulers had big dreams, I would say. And I think that I would call them almost impossible dreams, because the encroachments on Haitian freedom do not stop by any means when Boyer is overthrown, or when Suluk is overthrown, or when, and then on and on and on until we get to the US occupation, and then we get to the Duvalier era, and then we get to February 1986, and then we have an era of the UN and all kinds of other problems. And I would say that, so has any Haitian leader sort of lived up to this vision? I mean, Christophe in a sense, didn't live up to his own vision, right? He had a lot of dreams and he wasn't able to carry all of them out. And we don't know, would he have been able to, had he not committed suicide, had he not had so many members of his administration defect to the side of Boyer, which is what precipitates this. And so to that question, but I would also turn it around, because I don't think that any US presidents have lived up to the dreams that, as circumscribed as they were, as limited as they were, of the US Constitution and the American Declaration of Independence. Again, even with all their limitations, I don't think US leaders have done that either. And I think what we all need to be imagining is a world where it's not only just possible to have the dreams, but we construct a society where carrying them out doesn't feel like some impossible task that forces us to sacrifice life, that forces us to all go into debt. Every single nation is essentially a debtor nation to some other nation. We need to think differently about how we operate as a world.
And thank you for saying that. I think that I really am really interested in that answer, because I think we often hold Black leaders to an impossible extreme, that you don't see that same level of extreme for the American founding fathers and all their shortcomings as slave owners and things like that. But for some reason, we expect perfection out of, whether it's Haiti's four founders, Nelson Mandela, some of the post-colonial African countries. Like we expect something from them that we never expect of white-ruled nation. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, definitely. I echo that. So my next question, and I see it percolating in the chat below as well, is whether there are any possibilities of having France repay the money it stole from Haiti. And let me just give a little context from that. It's not that Haiti hasn't tried, right? There has been a lawsuit at some point by Ira Kurzban. There has been a number of discussions within the United Nations, especially while they were thinking up the decade of Afro-descendants in which we are right now, where there were a lot of talks about reparations, which the UN, vehemently pushed against. But here we are today. It feels like there's new appetite for this discussion. We are in a Black Lives Matter movement moment. What are prospects now? What are the possibilities?
Well, I've come to believe that the deeper I delve into the history of the indemnity, the repayment efforts of Haiti in the 19th and in the 20th century, plus Aristide's demands for reparations, which included the lawsuit that you mentioned, and which was undoubtedly a factor in the world colluding with Haitian opposition forces to have him removed from office, right? So that's complicated, but it is true that Aristide demanded repayment, and the next thing you know, France, which hadn't been involved in Haitian affairs since the era of the indemnity, is suddenly involved again. So I have come to believe that this demand for repayment will actually have to come from French people in France. They will have to take responsibility for their history. They will have to take responsibility for what their nation did, and the people in their country whose names are traceable, because we have lists of the people who received indemnities. We know the names of the banks that exacted these exorbitant funds from Haiti, and we know the exact government coffers and areas they went to, right? But Jacques Chirac, around the time of the bicentennial, French president at the time, was so dismissive of Haitian claims for repayment. He basically said, watch over your own government, essentially, take care of your own regime. And one of his ministers said that the case had been closed since 1885, referring to the moment when that initial amount of 90 million francs was paid off. Like, we're done with that, history is over. Nicolas Sarkozy tried to obfuscate the matter as well by saying he would cancel Haiti's debts. This is post the earthquake, donate money here and here to this organization and to these funds. And then Francois Hollande was even worse. He used language trick, right? He said, oh yeah, we owe Haiti a debt. And then when pressed, said it's a moral debt, basically not a financial one. And so I think unless French people in France, like Thomas Piketty, like different people who go on French TV to have this be their talking point, unless they actually step up, French people know how to strike. They know how to do manifestation. They know how to block the trains and the planes from running. They know how to disrupt and engage in civil disobedience. So, and where there's a will, there's a way. And so unless they demand that their government repay Haiti, there will be little reason for the French government to comply. That a bunch of Haitian Americans or even US Americans in the United States are upset, or people in Haiti are upset, they've shown willful disregard on several different occasions, and every time it's brought up. They won't even apologize, because that would be to acknowledge that there was something to apologize for. So again, just from French people in France, I think I don't see a way at present.
Thank you for that. I think that's an unfortunate and a really harsh reality. We see that a lot of the Caribbean nations have come together to push for reparations, and instead they get a lot of pushback. And we also hear that, oh, it was a long time ago. This isn't our responsibility. None of us own slaves, even though we see that the descendants of slave owners and those who benefit from white privilege continue to reap the benefits of, slavery and white supremacy throughout the regions. So I think this brings me to my last question, in that as we hope to shape a future of Black liberation, not only in Haiti, but throughout the world and the region in itself, what should Haitians and those pushing for these movements learn from Haiti's mistakes as well as Haiti's triumphs?
I would say that, that to be true to the visions of what the Haitian people want. And that's why I say it can't come from me. I live in the United States, even though I'm of Haitian descent. It's going to come, that vision is going to come from within Haiti, and to never stop believing that it can really actually be possible. Because I would say, again, to bring it back to the US side, one of the most frustrating things about living in the United States and being a US citizen is to see the complacence among my fellow citizens who are willing to accept scraps, who are willing to accept the changes of names on buildings in place of real, actual change. And I think it's a moment that is not just for Haitians, that we all have to demand better of our leaders. And so, yes, when I see Haitians protesting in the streets, and I know our next panelist is going to talk about the Petro-Caribe challenge. When I see Haitians protesting in the streets, I say, if people are not listening and the government is not listening, this is what we do. And we've seen so many protests erupting here in the United States. But we have to continue to call our government leaders to account, and not simply believe that we have to wait all the time for the vote. Because so much harm can be created in the moment between voting and the next election. And so people who criticize Haitians, especially from afar, especially those in the United States who are living through our own moment of trying to wait out the clock, and what are we waiting for? We could be waiting forever. So I would say, I hope that the next leaders of Haiti and the next leaders of the United States will be committed to more just, humane, and anti-capitalist policies, because we have seen that being debtor nations only means that you're willing to sacrifice lives for money.
For sure.
Thank you, Marlene. This is just fascinating. I think we can talk about this for like another few hours, but we do have another half of this panel to move on to. But I just wanted to say that the reason why we created this platform and have you talking about history, and now we're going to talk about present day Haiti, is that in order to fully appreciate the present, we need to have a strong handle on the past. And at least from this conversation, it is clear to me that from the very start, Haiti had to operate from a place of scarcity rather than abundance, the very same abundance that has made France so prosperous, right, over the years. And we're going to next have Emmanuela Douyon from Haiti, one of our activists from Haiti, who is best known for the Côte Cob Petro-Caribe movement, joined by Wanda Tima of l'Union Suite, who are going to give us the present day perspective and kind of a link just talked about, right? The perspectives that you just offered to us to present day Haiti. So Wanda, I am turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you for all this information. I'm sitting here like taking notes as you guys are talking. And Emmanuela, thank you so much for joining us today. Like
Thank you.
Kassan said, there's a lot of protests going on. The world is protesting right now, right? Like we're so used to talking about Haiti and the protests going on in Haiti, but right now, the last couple of months, the world is protesting. And before we get into some of the different types of protests and things that's going on in Haiti, I wanted to start our conversation with pretty much asking you, what is the life in Haiti? What is life in Haiti right now, you know, for the average Haitian?
Well, what can I say? The average Haitian now is living in a country full of opportunities, full of potential, but they are living in really hard conditions. And it is because the economy has been performing really badly lately. And like this year, we expect it to contract by 4%. And almost 1 in 3 Haitian is living in food insecurity. And there is a real dependence on remittances. Remittances from the Haitian living abroad represent almost 34% of our GDP. This means a lot. I don't think there are many sectors in our economy which represent that amount, that percentage of our gross domestic product. And the inflation is really high, almost 20%. This means a lower purchasing power for the average Haitian. And we already know that the minimum wages are really low, 500 good, which is almost $5. And for people who are working, like for some other people, it's less than this. It's about $2. For housekeepers, for example, it's less than $3 a day. And the life expectancy is around 60 years old, 65 years old. And most of the population is really young, actually. It's a good thing in one way. It's not such a good thing in another way. It's a good thing because we can have advantage from our youth, but we need to invest in them. This is not really happening now. But if we do invest in the young Haitian, a lot can happen. And this is pretty much the big picture. And on the bright side, there are some good things. We're still living in a Caribbean country. The weather is still good. We still have a vibrant culture and a food, a music. But we still have the same old problem, political instability, inequality, and the average Haitian has to work really, really hard to earn a decent living. And the environment is not really good for them. I can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, it's working now.
Okay. One of the biggest conversations that's happening right now, especially in the diaspora, is the conversation of inflation, right? A lot of people don't really understand how bad that affects, you know, everyday life in Haiti. Can we talk a little bit more about what's going on right now with the inflation?
Yes, what's happening in Haiti is really special because when you talk about inflation in other countries, for example, a country like the United States, the central bank is working hard to make the inflation rate stay around 2%. And in Haiti, it's more than 20% now. You can see the gap. And we are earning salaries in good mostly. Most Haitians are earning a salary in good, yet our price are like indexed to the US dollar. Basically, our salary remain the same in good, but the good keep depreciating against the US dollar. So besides the normal inflation that other countries know, we have an inflation based on the rate of the good against the US dollar. For example, like a few years ago, $1 was 50 gold, and the average Haitian worker in the public administration, for example, was earning, let's say, 30,000 gold, which was, let's say, 500 US dollar at the time. Now 30,000 gold is not even, it's less than half of this. So the salary is like half of what it was before, yet that person still have to pay more to afford life in Haiti, because the cost of living in Haiti is really, really high. And this is really, even for a professional who have a decent salary, it's hard because you have to make a lot of changes to adjust, to keep living a decent life, because every single thing, like housing, food, we do not produce enough. So we cannot say that, okay, the price of like food will remain the same, because we're still buying it from abroad. And if the gold is losing its value, it's depreciating, then it's more expensive. This is what's happening now, and there is no sign that it will improve. And for those who don't know, hey, the inflation rate in Haiti is among the 10 highest in the world now. We're not as bad as what is happening in countries like Zimbabwe, even Venezuela. It's not that bad, but it's bad. And yes, we're losing purchasing power, and it is like worsening living condition in the country.
And one of the key things, and you mentioned before, is the reason why we're in a lot of these situations is because of the corruption, right, that's going on.
Yeah.
So how has corruption in Haiti impacted the lives of Haitians?
I think we can go back to the colonial time. We've been living with corruption like for a long, long time, and it has been affecting our country, both in terms of like political situation, social situation, economic situation. And if we take, let's talk about the political aspect first. What happened with so much corruption going on? It undermined democracy. To win election, you only need to have money, and this money you will get it from corrupt officials, corrupt businessmen, or some other people engaging in some corrupt activities, because they are the one who have a lot of money to invest in like political campaign. The other businessmen who are not into corruption are not earning that much money. So corruption, because of corruption, now the political process is weak, and those who get elected are not necessarily the one who are most popular. They are not necessarily the one who have a better plan. They are the one who will continue what we call state capture, is having all the political process going towards some private interest. And this is what's been happening in Haiti for a long time. Not only the past 10 years, but for a very long time, people get into power to push their private interests and the interests of their families and friends. And the economic aspect, what they do is they deprive us of resources that could be used to improve some infrastructure, for example, provide health services for those who are in some areas who do not have it. But instead of doing this, they invest that money in projects that are not necessarily needed, but projects with high capital, like capital intensive projects, where they can use that money for their own interest, like money laundering. And it's really affecting us. And some other aspect that we do not necessarily consider when we're talking about corruption is how it erodes social values, patriotism, for example, like, because the country is getting poorer and poorer, and so many people now think that the only way to get rich is to engage in corruption somehow. Because, let's think about competition. You have a business, I have the same business, you offer a better product, but I will get contract because I pay a bribe, for example. And this is wrong. When this happens, like, so many people will leave the country, so many people will stop investing unless they engage in those corrupt practices. But not everyone wants to do it. And this is why we cannot attract some kind of investment, And we need investment. We need investment to create wealth, to create jobs. And corruption is doing all that. And if we take the Petro-Caribe case, for example, this was money that was supposed to support poor people, like in some social program, build bridges, build road, build school, build a hospital. Yet that money was like mismanaged, and we ended up wasting money and not having anything to show for it. One of the hospital, for example, Hospital Sylvie in Martissan, it was supposed to serve Martissan, which is an impoverished community, but they didn't do it, and now we are still putting money in our national budget to finish that hospital. This is like waste of money, waste of resources. We're making corrupt people getting richer, and the poor do not have access to services that they should have based on the amount of money that was spent. And it undermined trust in the society and justice and so many other things.
Thank you. Just want to remind everyone that please feel free to ask your questions, and you can drop your questions on social media or on Zoom, and we will get the questions at the end. So you just mentioned the Petro-Caribe protesting and challenging. Another thing we've been talking about tonight is the fact that a lot of these things have been happening a long time. Corruption has been happening a long time. A lot of the political unrest has been happening for a long time. So you dived in a little bit about the Petro-Caribe, but let's talk about that a little bit, like to kind of like help people understand, like what was the protest mainly about, like, and why was this protest the one that so many people galvanized behind, and took to the streets. A lot of young people also joined that to try to force some change.
Why was Petro Challenge most popular? Why most people were felt concerned about this case? I think it's because it happened after 2010, and it happened after 2018. Why 2010? The earthquake. So many things happened. We lost so many people, and there was the dream that we will build Haiti afterwards. We were all dreaming about how we will rise from the ashes. Yeah. And so we had high expectation. And then in 2018, 8 years later, we didn't have that high propaganda that was in effect before. People were seeing that 8 years later, nothing happened. And then inflation. And when they decided to increase the price of oil, and there was that 6, 7, 8 July 6, 7, 8, the riots that happened. And in the main argument, the main reason they wanted to increase the price of oil was because the government didn't have enough money. So we were thinking, everyone was thinking, why don't we have enough money? What did they do with that money? So when that Petro Challenger, the first one, Gilbert asked, where did the Petro-Caribe money go? It was because we all knew, because of the reports from the Senate, that the Petro-Caribe project, it was largely publicized. It was the one 3.8 billion. We knew it was part of it was invested in the country. Nothing happened, and now they had to increase the price of oil because we didn't have money. So what did they do with all the money that we had? So when Gilbert launched that movement, and the main grievances were like government impunity, government corruption, we all could relate to that as Haitians. We all could agree that they have been wasting our resources. And we all could agree that at some point, something needs to be done. And I think we are like the young people who do not want to leave Haiti and go somewhere else. And it was like our responsibility to do something. So many of us gathered, and we launched that movement. Petro-Caribe Challenge emerged. And we've been doing this for the past 2 years, asking for accountability, asking for a trial because we want to know what happened. We kind of know what happened. The Court of Auditors published two reports that clearly prove how and who mismanaged most of the amount of money that was included in the Petro-Caribbean Fund. So now we want a trial. We want to have the rest of the audit, of course. They still need to publish more. And we want to know who are, and we want those people to face charges because somehow we need to show the example and we need to make it the case that show that Haiti's money is for the people, not for private interests.
So the three things you mentioned, because I was gonna ask you next, like what did the protesters want to see happen? And what I'm hearing you say is, we wanted the trial, we wanted an audit, and definitely wanted to file charges against the people involved. So
yes, and also one of the things we wanted is for the president to step down because the sitting president Moise, he is indicted in the Petro-Caribbean report because he was running a business that was involved. So as part of our grievances, we want him to step down. And if he stepped down, then we will need a transitional government. That was also part of what we were asking for. And we want a transitional government that will make some key changes, like in the political prospect, like elections, organizing fair election, have audit of the main institution, and have the Petro-Caribbean trial, and also improve the social climate, like less insecurity, so that we can feel safe in this country.
Protesting, of course, is about change, and like we mentioned, this protest was extremely, loud and supported, even, here in the U.S. With the things that you guys are asking for, have you seen any of it? Has there been any kind of change or response to the protest?
As a response to the protest, we only got two parts of the audit of the Petro-Caribbean Fund, not even the whole thing. This is still something. Like, we won't say that we didn't get anything for like almost 3 years of protests. But compared to everything we wanted, this is like very little, and this is why we need to still keep pushing. And it is also a big difference between Haiti and other countries in the world. And this is something that the Haitians living in the diaspora, they need to understand. For example, let's take Black Lives Matter. There are a lot of changes that happen because of this. Like, let's take the time frame after George Floyd's death. So many businesses came forward and made changes. A lot happened. Of course, they didn't get everything they wanted, but they gained a lot. And in Haiti, you protest for 2 years and you can't even have a full report. This is how bad it is. And this is somehow why people are always protesting in Haiti, because the officials do not listen and they do not react the right way when we do protest. So far, this is the only thing that we've got. And we've also bring corruption in the debate. It's very difficult to have people talking about Haitian politics, Haitian business life, without talking about corruption. Now we make people ask whether officials are corrupt or not. It's not granted that, okay, you corrupt, we know that and it's okay. Now people will say, you corrupt, you shouldn't be here. And it wasn't like this before. So I think this is a small changes, small progress, but we still need to do a lot, and we're still asking for change, systemic change, and it will take a long time.
And speaking of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, one of the things that we did see is when the Black Lives Matter protests pretty much went global, we saw a lot of Haitian activists take to Twitter to document the lives lost to violence in Haiti under a campaign, and the campaign was called Nous voulons vivre. So why was that the message chosen for that, and how was that campaign received by Haitian authorities?
Even before the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd assassination, George Floyd, we were talking about Nouvelle Vie. But when people started to talk about Black Lives Matter, some people just say that Black Lives Matter in Haiti too. And the fact is that in that same period of time, people were massacred in Pont Rouge. Pont Rouge, this is where we have that flag event each year. And not Arcaye, actually. Pont Rouge is well known in our history, yet they are massacring people there. We have people murdered in their home, and we had 2 young dancers killed for no one is killed for a reason, but this was worse. They went to a dance practice and they were killed. So it wasn't only because of Black Lives Matter in the US, but it was also because it was important to use that exposure, to use the fact that the hashtag was gaining popularity in Haiti to raise the issue of like our life in Haiti and saying that nous vivons. And another reason is that we don't like living in hard conditions, like I mentioned before. And it's also a way to point out that we want a decent life. We want to be able to afford some things in this country. We want to be able to have a decent life and enjoy our life in Haiti, not having curfew, not because it's government imposed, but because it's not safe. And being able to live as Haitian, to live here and not having to leave it and go to USA, to Canada, so we can actually have a decent life. It's about all of this. And we only took advantage of the fact that if Black Lives Matter was getting popularity to talk about Black life in Haiti.
And even with that, with the support that it gained, because you guys, like you said, you utilized what was happening with Black Lives Matter to pretty much amplify the Nouvelle Vie message. Here in the diaspora, I know I go through this myself a lot, even as someone that's, running a platform too. I'm always trying to support Haiti. A lot of times I feel lost. Like I feel like I don't know how to help, or I don't know the best way to help. And, like, how can I amplify your message better and what you guys are doing on the ground? So how can the diaspora support you guys the same way we supported the Black Lives Matter movement here?
I think what you can do, it goes both ways. We Haitian activists living in Haiti need to do some effort to reach out to Haitian in the diaspora, to some influencers like you, and explain what we're doing. This is something we need to do. And Haitian in the diaspora need to educate themselves on the issues. For example, it's hard for you in the diaspora. Why? Because there are like so many lies, fake news, propaganda, and it's hard to know what's really going on. I've heard so many crazy things about what's happening in Haiti, but I think it's easy to have access to news and information online, but it's also important to choose where your information is coming from and not to believe everything you read. And then I think there are ways that you can contact officials in your country because, for example, those who are living in the US, you have some congressmen and other people who are like involved or who care about issues like in Haiti because they have so many Haitians in the constituency or because of other relations. You can reach out to them. You can reach out to activists in Haiti by email because we are giving interview, for example, to journalists. The same way we can provide more information, have webinars, chat, and I think people from the diaspora can also support by offering services pro bono, by even mentoring some activists because some of you have been doing a lot of work and there are tools that we do not necessarily have, or there are things we could do better that we do not necessarily know. And there can be exchanges of knowledge and experience. And I think it's good also to learn, like there is a huge problem of information, like what kind of information the diaspora have access to. And I think if there is something very urgent that needs to be done is like telling people what is true and what is not, and like have some good references where to go for information. I think this is lacking, and this creates room for so many fake news and all.
No, absolutely. And of course, like you said, a lot of times because it's lack of information, a lot of people just assume or think we know what's best or what you guys want and what change should look like. But as a person that's on the ground, that's, constantly working, being an activist on the ground, what does change look like for you? Like, what do you guys see change looking like? And also going back to Marlene's previous conversation, are there any parts of Christophe's vision for Haiti that you guys would like to see implemented today?
What changes look like is very important because if we go back to that issue of diaspora and the disconnect, I think one thing that always happens, it doesn't work at all, is that some people want to help, for example, and they say, okay, so many kids do not have access to health care. I'll bring some medicine in Haiti. This is like from good faith. This is something really good to do. But people in Haiti, the kind of change they want is like a better health system. People like a health minister who will really put the people need first, who will try to improve the system so that they can have insurances, so they can have like proper services. Not every summer when some people from the diaspora come to Haiti, but systemic change, like someone said, not charity. And because it's like a real country, like if you take a country like the United States, you know how it works. It's a system, like there are key institutions. And what we want is reform in those institutions in Haiti, not some, I don't know how to say, superficial, like we really want systemic changes and we want rupture. There has been so many bad habits, like in terms of governances, in terms of how we do business, in terms of how we behave as Haitian. We almost forget where we're from. Like we did the Haitian Revolution, and you mentioned Christophe. Christophe was that builder. He had a vision for Haiti. And now people almost lose hope that someday we can go back to, for example, what Christophe wanted for Haiti. We are not building anything anymore, almost like some people are still trying really hard. And I think that changes is somehow giving the people who really want to work for Haiti, people who have project, plan, and potential, or more spaces, more room to create. And we want a political system that will serve the interests of the majority. And we want better like environment, not so many crimes happening, and justice, because impunity is also the root of most of our problem. Because if anyone can do anything and nothing will happen to that person, this doesn't help anything. And maybe you have heard so many people on the radio asking for a change in the system. And this is what it's about. This is rupture with everything that put us in this situation and a new beginning for the country with people who really love Haiti and whether they are living in Haiti or abroad, and people who really want to make this place a better place. We have so much potential.
Absolutely, that we do. Thank you so much, Emmanuela,
Thank you, Wanda.
thank you so much. I like Hassan said earlier, we can go on and on and on with even this conversation for so much longer. But I want to go ahead and open the floor up to people that's been asking questions, and also my co-host with Encultured Co. To get some of these questions in and have you guys answer a few for us.
Yeah, thank you so much again to both of our panelists. I'm sure you both probably want to talk to each other too and share some ideas. And Emmanuela, thank you also for really taking the time to elaborate on the perspective of some of the Haitians on the ground, because unfortunately, just to be quite honest, it's often the voices of Haitian Americans, because we speak English and we have Western degrees that's prioritized over the voices of people in Haiti. And we really want to be active in reshaping that dynamic, and so that we don't become white saviors with melanin, thinking that we're going to go save Haiti because you guys are already doing the work to save yourselves. And we just need to figure out how we can amplify your voices and support your movements and really shape a Haiti with you, where Black lives, all Black lives, whether you're rich, poor, light skinned, dark skinned, bourgeois, not bourgeois, matter. Um, so within that vein, we've got a lot of really, really great questions. So a question for you, Emmanuela, is as a leader, one of the leaders of Nupa Domi and the Petro Caribe Challenge, what would you consider as what would you consider to be the successes of the movement? And what would you consider to be some of the mistakes that you have made?
Oh.
They just go right to it. They go right to it.
I think I'll start with the mistakes. Okay, let me talk about the success. What will be the success of our movement? I would say two things. First, because the main reason we are doing this is because of the Petro-Caribe scandal, the Petro-Caribe affair. So we want to try. We really want the people who were involved in this financial scandal to pay for what they did. We really want to make it the case that our children and everyone in Haiti will remember this is what happened to you when you steal government money. This is one thing. And the second thing is more structural. We are doing this because we realized along the way that we definitely need to change this system. We need to, and this, we will say that we succeed if after all this, a new class of politicians emerge. People who really love this country. If we can have fair election and at least have 5 years of political stability with people who are really pushing a development agenda forward, then we will say that we have done our part and we could say that we are quite satisfied. Some mistake we've made maybe is because we were all young professionals who haven't been doing political activism before. So of course, we had to learn a lot along the way. Maybe we should have communicated more and better, because some people still do not understand what we are doing. And at the same time, we do not have enough time to communicate enough. And some other people are communicating for us. They are saying things that are not accurate. They are saying that we are doing this for this reason, that reason, like so many lies. And we could have done this better. We could have, I think this is a mistake, but still, like I mentioned, it's because we do not necessarily have the kind of resources needed to communicate better. And we've learned from this. And after that, it's, fighting corruption in Haiti means fighting more than half of the population. It means fighting those who have a lot of money, because when you mismanage 2.8 billion, you got a lot of money. And of course, they are not happy, and it's not easy. It's really not easy. You can fight against so many other things in Haiti. It will be easy. Let's say poverty. You do not disturb anyone, and it's safe, and it's okay. People understand it. But fighting corruption is hard, and it may happen that we make more mistakes. But I think what we want is not like in our interest, and it's good for the country. And as long as we keep doing our best and we have your support, we might have like success as I defined it before.
Thank you, Emmanuela, for that. The next question I have is for Marlena, although I think Emmanuela might be able to answer too. And this is something that we hear a lot, both Haitians in Haiti and Haitians in the diaspora, is that does it matter if France repays the money, because the Haitian government wouldn't know what to do with it. They wouldn't know how to properly handle the reparation money due to corruption. So is that a valid concern? What are some of your thoughts or answers to that? I have my answer to that, but it's not a question for me, so.
For me, I would say my gut reaction to the question, which I have gotten a lot, like in the comments to my article, people emailing me, all kinds of manner of things about that, about corruption in the current Haitian government and the question of reparations. But my gut reaction is it's a racist question for one thing, right? Because when the tsunami happens and all this money pours into, right, are we asking these same questions? So again, to go back to something that France said, which was, you know, creating an exception of Haiti, and Pouillot gave us that great term, Haitian exceptionalism, to talk about the ways in which, you know, so it's an interesting conundrum, right? Almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you help to create the conditions of instability and insecurity in Haiti, right? That lead to corruption, as Emmanuela was talking about, because people try to survive, and then there's no redress. So people who really are bad actors, who actually want to harm others, there's no recourse. So they get to do that without any consequences, right? So you set these conditions, and then you say, we can't give you the money because you'll be too irresponsible if we give it back to you. So I would say to that question, that we're asking the wrong question, right? Which is, how do we set the conditions in Haiti so that we are not just, that reparations doesn't become just like giving medicine, as Emmanuela talked about, that we reform an entire system, which starts with reforming ourselves, because there's a lot of monetary, financial, and political corruption in France and in the United States and in plenty of countries around the world, where you have private citizens actually defrauding other private citizens as well as the government. So I would say, let's create the conditions of reform for ourselves. Let's talk about what that would be, rather than putting the onus constantly on the Haitian people, who are the ones who suffer, not the government that everyone is saying is corrupt. It's the Haitian people who suffer from not having this debt that France owes to Haiti repaid.
Well, if I can add something, I'll simply say that it's not because we have corrupt officials now that we cannot get this money. The whole idea is to push Haiti to get rid of those corrupt officials. And it's not because the people are honest that we receive money, it's because we need to hold them accountable. Therefore, the money is for the country. It will be good to fund our project. We can receive it and force those people to manage it the right way. We need to help them accountable and push them to act the way they should, and not say, well, we have corrupt officials and we'll do them. We'll not. And matter of fact, we can change this, and it's not that hard.
Wanda, do you want to take the next question?
Yes. So the next question, I guess, same thing. Any one of our panelists can answer this one. It says the Haitian diaspora is extremely concerned with the current situation in Haiti. Is there a better way for us to gear up the upcoming elections to make sure Haiti's independence is no longer undermined, and the nations can start flourishing?
This is a hard question, but I'll say one thing about the election. Like, it is my dream for Haiti to have fair election where young and older people with vision for Haiti will run and win. But at the same time, we should not look for for the solution in election, because it's all about the kind of election. If we have election the same way we've been having them, like same causes will yield to the same result. If we have elections where gangs have like a lot of influence, we will have the elected officials that the gangs want us to have. It's about making sure that when we will have election in this country, it will be the right time, in the right environment, and it will be like fair election. Otherwise, nothing will change, and we'll still have protests right after the election because there will be fraud. And those people who will win those elections, they know how they win. They know it's because of corruption, fraud, etc., and all. So they will just do what they come to do, which is state capture, having the state working for their private interests. Nothing will change if we do not have fair election. And there are so many conditions that need to be, we need to check for so many things to have fair election.
I don't think I could add really anything to Emmanuela's wonderful answer, except to say, yes, things need to change, and elections are not going to be the answer unless things change, as you said.
I wanted to, France, I wanted to follow up with that, especially based on Emmanuel's response. There's another question on there, and I think that kind of ties in to what we're just talking about. Fair election is, of course, one of the things that we definitely need to change. And one of the questions here says, in terms of looking forward, what would you say is the main priority to build up Haiti as a whole? Which aspects of the system do you think we as Haitians need to put the most pressure on in order to begin the waterfall of positive change for the country? So I know, like, of course, fair election is one, and there is a lot of things. There's always going to be a lot of things. But I think, like, what are some key things you say, like that we can start immediately that could help with that change?
I don't know if Marlene wants to reply first, otherwise I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's hard to identify that one priority because there are so many priorities, so many urgent things need to be addressed in Haiti, and we need to change so many things. But I definitely think since we have a young population, there are like three urgent things we need to do is to invest in Haiti so we can produce more and have like even produce food for our people. Just imagine a few months ago when they decided to close the border and everyone was like, we're all going to die if food cannot come from abroad. And this is a shame because we used to be an agricultural country. We used to be the peer of the Antilles because we used to produce a lot. And I think we need to go back to this and have identified some key products. And it's not only about agriculture, it's like encourage all kind of industry in Haiti because we need to create jobs for those young people. More than half of the population is young. So we need to give them jobs and educate them as well. So education will be the next thing. And of course, we just need to improve the infrastructure a bit so we can attract tourists because we are in the Caribbean. It's easy money for us. We just need to make a few changes and attract those people who will be happy to visit Haiti and promote a better kind of tourism, by the way, because what we're doing now is not working. Say, come to Haiti without thinking what kind of tourists we want to attract. So many things are so expensive here. It should be like luxury tourism, but it's not because obviously what we offer is not luxury. So we need to define the kind of tourism we want to promote and have a real plan. And I think this should work. Like get those young people working soon attract foreign investment, educate them, and have tourists come in this country. This will help in the short term.
Absolutely. Schools, roads, hospitals, all of these things are necessary to create a kind of functioning society where people can live and breathe as Haitians are protesting for basic services. And I think these have to be fulfilled. And I think the LACU system, when sort of people fled into Port-au-Prince from the countryside, that if we can get to a place where there is farming happening and subsistence farming happening, and not be importing rice from Miami that floods the market and makes it so that Haitian rice planters can't compete. I think that the way that Haiti interacts in the global world system, in the market, has to change, has to fundamentally change, because otherwise it will always be cheaper to, except more expensive, right? Isn't that the paradox? To import food and stuff from abroad. And then, as you said, Emmanuela, what would happen if suddenly that stops and people say, where's our food gonna come from? So again, that insecurity that then just kind of ricochets outward. So I would say, I think farming and agriculture is one huge element and is a basic way that societies support themselves and create less dependency, especially in a place where Haiti has uneven power with the other people in the world market, and namely the United States.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because one of the aspects that we didn't really get time to touch upon was the role of foreign powers and foreign NGOs and foreign entities in not only Haitian politics, but Haitian export, the building back Haiti, and all of those things. And I think one of the examples that has been like really prominent in most people's mind is the example of the American Red Cross that raised billions of dollars and built 4 houses. But as someone who worked in international development in Haiti, like the Red Cross was actually the standard, not an outlier. And one of the questions someone asked was, are there practical mechanisms to hold foreign governments and foreign organizations accountable in Haiti?
To me, it doesn't seem at present that there is any accountability when we talk about, especially after the earthquake, land of 10,000 NGOs. People say, oh, well, that's like a crazy number. But then, you know, anybody who's ever been on a flight, especially post-earthquake to Haiti, can see that there is a huge influx of not just NGOs, but also religious groups doing kind of outreach work, as they would call it, right? And again, who is sort of making sure that these building projects are, everybody said, oh, Haitians didn't build to any like modern codes. This is why you had such a disaster in Port-au-Prince. But who is overseeing all of the building that is going on by NGOs? And I think that it can't be the wild, wild west. I do think that there needs to be change in how NGOs and other non-governmental groups are treated in Haiti. Perhaps Emmanuela has ideas about sort of how those changes would come about, but I do think the government has to step in and regulate this. The question is how, and what model to use to do so.
I think what I will add to this is exactly what you said in the beginning, Marlene, when you talk about how the French people are the one who actually can do something about reparation. I think the same way in this issue, this particular issue, this is where the diaspora come. They are the best. They are like the one who can really push this. Most of you are Haitian American, so you are American, and there are like so many American NGOs in Haiti, for example. And the best way, the best place to hold them accountable is in the United States. And you are the one who can do it better. We, Haiti, we have the fact, we have the proof that a lot of organizations are not doing the right thing, and they are not doing what they are wasting money from. And we know this, but we do not necessarily have the means to push them to like provide financial statement and report to help them accountable. But you in the United States, you know all the tools, you know all the instruments, and they are American organization. For example, I'm taking this example. They could be French organization, and Haitian in France will do the same. And this is where you can really help. Same for foreign countries, like all of them, because geopolitics, they all have their say in what's going on in Haiti. Sometimes it's good, most of the time it's not. And you are the one who can tell them, like, what is your policy toward Haiti? This work, this doesn't. And you can influence what the country where you're living is doing in Haiti or is promoting in Haiti. And you can do it better than us Haitian on the ground, because we cannot say, like, we cannot go to some embassy and tell those people, like, and tell them, you shouldn't do this, this, this. We can say it, but we are not their citizen. Like, it's not even something interesting to do. Therefore, like, but you're American, you're French, you're Haitian, and you can do it, and it will work better and faster.
Thanks for that. And that is a great response, because as Marlene said, the people who can best hold France accountable are French citizens, and the same for us, right? The people who are going to really move the needle on this, at least when we look at the foreign policies as they are applied to Haiti, are the citizens that are here, who can hold them accountable at the ballot box or in other measures here. So I think that this is going to be the last question. I'm so sorry. We have so many great questions, and there's a really active commentary happening in the chat. But in terms of, and hopefully this is leaving us on a high point, because this next question is asking us whether there is a model. Like when you, Emmanuela, and maybe you, Marlene, think about next steps, is there a precedent for what we're trying to do in Haiti? Is there a country similar in size, for instance, or similar in historical past, that has modeled the changes that we want to see? If so, and maybe it's not a whole country, and maybe they've only done it in certain parts, or I don't know how you want to slice the question, but is there a model out there? Is there a precedent for what we've been dreaming up and talking about today? And a little bit related to that, the second part of the question is that, is there really a lack of skill or will within the Haitian government that accounts for the failure for them to take things to the level so that every Haitian can live comfortably in Haiti?
On the first question, is there a model of a country? I mean, I do think it's interesting, and I'm not proffering this as a model, but I do think it's interesting that the Black Panther movie, the sort of mainstream knowledge of Wakanda, which was part of the Black Panther comics, became so popular all over the world. I do think that that's interesting, the idea that there would be kind of a Black nation that protects itself from the predatory practices of the colonial world, the former colonial world powers and the great world powers today, like your France, your England, your Germany, right? The big capitalist countries. And so rather than sort of offering this as a model, because this is a fantasy world, I say, the model is, to me, at least, anti-capitalist, because we have seen that capitalism is built on inequalities, structural and personal, individual, right? That it feeds off this, and that they proliferate. And they proliferate across space and time. So you don't just have inequalities for one group of people in one place at one time. It's ricochets across the world. And so this is why we see the similar kinds of inequitable conditions in Haiti. We see in lots of other places, including here in the United States, where it's a question of scale. But there are plenty of people in the United States who live with instability, insecurity on food and their person, who are subject to all kinds of disease, have no health care, are living lives that they feel like they can't breathe. They feel like they can't live within this system. And so I would say that rather than looking to any particular country, that just imagining and thinking about how you could really implement a country that's not dependent on making sure that some people will have a lot and some people will not have enough, and that it also cannot be based on repression of people. And I think this has been the mistake in a lot of countries that have tried socialism and communism, is the sense of repression. So how do we get to anti-capitalism, but also while respecting freedom and justice? That the kind of freedom and justice that Emmanuela was talking about is really absent on the ground in Haiti today.
Thank you, Marlene. If I can add on this, they asked, like that person asked about a model. Is there a country that has been through the same? And if I can add anything, I'll say first, we should not take Rwanda as the model. I know a lot of people want Haiti to duplicate what happened, what they did in Rwanda. Some of our politicians even try to implement some project that were achieved in Rwanda here in Haiti. It didn't work, and for reason I don't know. But I think we should look to Asia, some countries in Asia like Taiwan. I might be biased on this because I studied in Taiwan, but I don't think I am. Because even if we take another country like Singapore had to solve their corruption problem before becoming what they are today. Those countries, who they call Dragon of Southeast Asia, they went from poverty, and now they are like some developing country almost. If you take Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, they did something, and they went from almost nothing at some point, and they invest in education. Taiwan, for example, they put a lot of emphasis on education, job creation, and they used foreign aid to promote development in their country. And this is one example that foreign aid is not all bad. You just need to know how to use it and where to allocate it and how to influence it, because some donors, they only want to give money for their own interest. And it's up to us to say what we want, where we want to put that money. And I would definitely say we need to look for what those countries did, but at the same time, I think Haiti has to reinvent something in the world. We need to set a model for others to follow, because we are really special. And what we did in Haiti, like, is unique. Haiti is a unique country, and we can create something new, different, and beautiful for the world to get inspiration from, just like we did in 1804. And I believe we can do that again. And the other part of the question was whether it's a lack of skills or lack of will. Definitely not a lack of skills. Of course, we do miss some people with some specific skills in Haiti, but we can still get them in the diaspora. It's a lack of political will. So many people are very qualified in this country. So many people are really qualified in the actual government, for example, yet they are taking some very real measure because they do not put the majority's interest first, and they do not have what it takes to bring about change. It won't be easy. You need the political will, and you need the support of the people. Most people do not have those political will and the support of the people. This is why we need fair election, by the way, because we need people who will have like full support, and we will take the hard decision, make the hard choices to change things.
Thank you so much to you both for those wonderful questions, and to my fellow co-hosts for really pushing this conversation. I think that one of the takeaways for me in both of your last statements was that Haiti did something that was unimaginable in the 1800s. And rather than looking at Rwanda or Wakanda or even the Dominican Republic, we really need to do something that's unimaginable again in terms of Afrofuturism and really shape a place of Black liberation, because we don't have an example. There's nowhere that we can look that anyone, to be quite honest, is living a fair, equitable, and also rewarding life. So it's up to us, like, rather than looking for guidance, to really be the leaders. And I really love that idea in Afrofuturism, in that it pushes us to dream bigger rather than to settle for what we have today, which is just capitalist patriarchy kind of just grinding us down. And whether it's the example of Henri Christophe or the Petro-Caribe protesters, we see that Haiti has always pushed for more than what we have now. So I hope to challenge all of you who have joined us as participants to also think of a future where we can connect the past to the present and the diaspora to Haitians in Haiti, to really build that Afrofuturism, to take it beyond Wakanda and really recreate something here that our forefathers would be really, really proud of here on Earth. So thank you again, Emmanuela and Marlene, for taking the time to have this conversation with us. There are so many tidbits that we got out of this that I'm gonna rewatch this just to like take notes again. And Wanda, Kassan, really appreciate you guys also as acting as co-hosts. And a lot of people ask where they can find us on social media. We at In Culture Company are at In Culture Co. Anywhere on social media. Wanda, do you want to say where people can find you?
Yes, absolutely. So for us, we're in two different spaces. We're Linear Suite, so at Linear Suite on all platforms except for Facebook. And Facebook, we're on The Haitian American.
Emmanuela, Marlene.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for your comments. And I am on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Emma Douyon, EMMADOUYON. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was a pleasure for me too, and to talk to Emmanuela again. I'm at Fictions of Haiti on Twitter, Tropics of Haiti on Facebook, and at Fictions of Haiti also on Instagram. And I did put it in the chat. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone, and have a great night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.